Hi, hello. I hope you're doing well today. Welcome to our retirement planning webinar. I'm so glad that you're here today. Now, I know retirement planning can be confusing and even a little boring, so I'll try to keep it short and to the point because our goal is to make your retirement planning experience exciting and pain-free. So you can go ahead and start typing questions in the chat, and when we get to the end of the webinar, I'll definitely go over all of your questions. Okay, so we're just going to get started here. So if you have some coffee or even a glass of wine, some water, go ahead and get comfortable and we're going to get started. Alrighty, so some of you might be familiar with me and what I do, but for those who aren't, hi again, my name is Alicia. I am a wife, mother, and an independent licensed financial professional. So I'm an independent advisor, meaning I don't work with one specific company, but I'm contracted with several companies, which is nice for my clients because I'm able to offer different solutions from an unbiased point of view. And because I work with several companies, we have a variety of options for the client to choose from to best suit their situation. Versus when you meet with an advisor who represents one specific company, typically they're going to offer you solutions that only that company can provide, which makes their options somewhat limited, right? So I help my clients with retirement planning, life insurance, debt solutions, saving strategies, and Medicare planning. So I do quite a bit, but today we're going to focus on the retirement planning piece. Okay, so some of you may be wondering, what are we going to discuss today? Well, here's the agenda. You're going to learn everything you need to know before you retire. You're going to learn how pension plans work. A common question people with a pension will ask is, should I take my pension payout or the lump sum option? What's the difference? So we'll go over that and you'll learn things that you need to know about how I've helped my clients and how I might be able to help you with your retirement planning strategy. All right, so here are some facts about pensions. Many pension plans will only cover a percentage of your income during retirement, leaving most retirees with an income gap if it's your only source of retirement income. So Social Security may help fill that gap, or if you have other retirement accounts like IRA or a 403B or 401k, right? So those are typically other accounts that sometimes people have to fill those income gaps. Now, some retirees, they think their pension is guaranteed, but actually, if the pension plan is mismanaged or the company they work for goes bankrupt, you can lose a portion or even all of your retirement benefits. Retirees tend to take their pension via the employer route or the employer plan, which is very inflexible, which we'll talk more about later. But very few know you can actually turn your pension into a personal pension plan, which creates more flexibility for your situation. And we'll chat more about that later. Alrighty, so let's talk about some of the benefits to having a pension plan, right? Now, your pension payout is not based on market performance, but time served. So you don't have the same risk associated with your pension that a person with a 401k would have, right? Because your pension is not dependent upon market performance, right? Now, some pensions offer retirees medical benefits after retirement if they keep their pension within the employer's system. So, for example, I know with UCLA, if they receive their pension through the UC system, they can keep their medical benefits during retirement. And versus if they were to do the lump sum option, they would have to forfeit those medical benefits. So it's a hands-off plan. You don't need to worry about picking investment options and consider risk like you will with a traditional account. Also, many pensions have a spouse survivorship option, which allows retirees to transfer their pension payout to their spouse when they pass away, usually for a lesser amount. Okay, so those are some of the pros. Now let's chat about the cons. So the income payout is what it is, right? Like if you want to take out more or less, you can't make adjustments once it's turned on. Usually there's no legacy play. So once you and your spouse pass away, if there's extra funds, they just go back to the pension system. Like I mentioned earlier, mismanagement can and has occurred, which often falls on the retirees and can impact their payouts. If you look at this screenshot here, this is from a client of mine, and you see what it says in red. This is only an estimate. It is not a guarantee of eligibility or benefit amount, right? So it says that there, and it basically acts as a disclaimer, right? Because if something drastic happens, your pension payout could definitely change. And then if you need or want 100% of your income during retirement, in most cases, there will be an income gap, which we mentioned earlier. So during the next few slides that we go over, I just want to expand on some of these disadvantages, just so that you all have all of the information you need to know. Okay, so again, with the lack of flexibility, I had a client reach out to me. He retired from one job and was receiving $85,000 a year from a pension system in Maryland, moved to California, started working for UCLA. So he had his salary and then the pension that he's receiving from the Maryland pension system. Now, his problem was his income now is so high, he's getting killed in taxes. So his question was, can I defer this pension at least until I need it? Because I have to claim it now as income each year and I don't even need the extra money right now. But the answer was no, right? The pension was very standard. He couldn't turn that income off or reduce it. So, that's something to consider, right? And then, of course, if you're in a situation where you need to take out more income, even if it's just temporary, that's usually not an option. So that kind of plays into both sides of what the lack of flexibility could look like. Okay, so let's discuss a little further the lack of legacy plan. So some of you may be thinking, I'm okay with just having my spousal survivorship option. My kids are on their own, doing their own thing, which is okay and understandable. But I think it's unfortunate if a retiree and their spouse pass away, like during the earlier years of retirement, and they really didn't receive much of the pension payout, and then nothing goes to their adult children or even their grandchildren, right? So that's kind of something to think about, right? Tomorrow's not promised to any of us. If you enter retirement, pass away soon after you start your retirement and your spouse has already passed away, then, that money is just going to go back to the pension system in most cases. And just to give you a real life example, one of my clients, he went into retirement divorced. So he wanted his pension to go to his children, which wasn't an option via the UC pension system. He retired at age 72, so on the later side, and he had a heart attack a few years ago. So he figures, if he dies sooner than later, he wanted his payout to be split between his 3 kids rather than his spouse, right? So we turned his pension into a personal pension plan, which allowed him to be able to leave his account balance to his children instead of his spouse. So that's a real life example of how a person was able to change their pension into a personal pension plan to make it more flexible for their situation. Okay, so let's move on to where things get interesting. So again, if a pension is not managed correctly, it can fall on the retiree. But you don't need to take my word for it because I have some stories for you. So first, let's start with how prevalent it is for pensions to be underfunded, which can increase their risk of collapsing. So let's check out this clip really quick.
Promises that I'd made to my workers and retirees, I can no longer afford those now that I'm in financial difficulty. Perhaps I can shift those costs to other parties.
We act as the backstop.
The PBGC, financed by premiums from corporations, was set up in 1974 to encourage companies to maintain their pension plans and to ensure that promises to employees were kept.
A little over 800 full-time federal employees. We also have
But those promises turned out to be flimsy because companies were given a lot of flexibility to interpret the pension funding rules under the Employee Retirement Law, known as ERISA.
The funding rules under ERISA are fundamentally flawed. They're broken. They are riddled with loopholes.
You mean Congress wrote a law that said fund pensions and then, in effect, gave them a free pass?
I'm not sure you would characterize it as a free pass, but nonetheless, it does not require, the way it operates, companies to fully fund their pension promises.
By exploiting those loopholes, corporate America has created a time bomb. More than 18,000 companies have underfunded their pensions. In 5 years, several large companies have dumped their pension debts onto the PBGC. Its deficit is now $23 billion and threatens to balloon far larger.
The level of underfunding in the system as a whole, which we estimate at $450 billion today, is substantially more than it was just 4 or 5 years ago. It was less than $100 billion.
Let me get
Alrighty, so as you all can hear, underfunding is very common, right? And when a pension plan is not funded correctly by the employer, the chances of it collapsing are very high, right? And like I said, when that happens, it's not much that really you can do. It's out of your control. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind. Now, let's go ahead and move on to this next story. It's about a North Carolina pension recipient who was overpaid for his pension for 17 years. Okay, so let's take a look at that story.
We all have dreams of how we're going to spend our retirement years. What if the state took your dream away? A 5 on Your Side WRAL investigation found the department...
Not only because of the loss, difficult because of how Penny and Glenn spent the last of their 40 years together.
I hope nobody don't never have to go through what I've been through.
Let's rewind to 1996. Joe retired. He worked for the city as a heavy machinery worker, doing the dirty work, which kept Raleigh running.
I seen him in knee deep or more water, cold ice water, repairing water mains.
For years, the Glenns received letter after letter from the state's Retirement Systems Division, telling them what their payout was and that it was accurate. Then in 2018, another letter, this one, shattered everything. It told the Glenns there'd been a mistake and that for 17 years, the state had overpaid them more than $241,000. And now Joe and Penny had to pay every cent back.
I read it to him. We looked at each other and we broke down and started crying. Both of us. He said, baby, what am I going to do? I can't pay back $240,000. I didn't even know that they were overpaying me.
You know, I wish I wasn't doing this interview.
State Treasurer Dale Falwell. Walk me through. 5 on Your Side wanted to know how families could possibly know their payout was incorrect when they were reassured by the state that their payouts were correct.
Sure. That's a great point. But the dates that you mentioned are what we call pre-Dale, because I wasn't the treasurer then.
By pre-Dale, he means a previous administration when Treasurer Richard Moore was in office and the error occurred. Falwell said he had no choice but to go after the money. He told us the state retirement fund is worth $114 billion. And right now, 1 million North Carolinians are on the plan. To put that into perspective, the Glens debt is worth about 25 cents to every person on the plan. In other words, the $240,000 is a drop in the bucket for the state. But for the Glens, it was everything.
I said he won't never live to pay that back.
What did they say?
She said, well, we'll take it as long as we can.
And they did. Joe didn't hire a lawyer. He didn't look for a way out. The Glens filed for bankruptcy.
Can you think of a man at 80 years old going back to work?
Joe Glenn in his 80s went to work to pay an impossible debt by delivering parts for O'Reilly Auto.
In so many instances, there will be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on any one case that we cannot collect because, the person is aged out.
They've died?
Yes.
For all of his effort, Joe managed to pay back $4,976.17 before dying in June of last year.
In loving memory, Joseph Glenn.
But even in death, the state found a way to collect a little more. Joe's pension provided money for his funeral. It was $10,000. The state took that too, leaving Penny to pay for it herself.
Knowing that I'm not able to pay for it now, because of somebody else's error, that breaks my heart.
This is the man who stitched it up.
It's about taking care of people.
Ramil Ferguson. He owns RM Ferguson Funeral Home. And when he heard the story, he donated the service. Why did you decide to?
So you all are probably thinking, what a terrible story, right? Actually, I shared this story on my Instagram a few months ago, and it started a lot of conversation. The video actually did 1 million views. And it's just an unfortunate situation, and it's not as uncommon as you would think. Like I said, if a pension system is, it's not managed properly, whether that's underfunding or they're overpaying recipients, anything that kind of goes wrong, it often falls on the retirees, right? It sounds like this gentleman was being overpaid from the beginning, so I think it's fair to say they probably didn't know that they were being overpaid, right? Once you retire, you don't usually do a lot of homework to make sure that the amount is correct, right? They usually say, okay, this is what we're going to pay you, and you just say, okay, especially if it's an amount that you're comfortable with, right? So that's another example of mismanagement. Now, lastly, we have United Airlines, who went bankrupt, which meant this led to a reduction in retirement benefits, including pension payouts. So let's take a look at this clip.
Well, you got the yogurt and the grapefruit, I guess.
Right, and the tacos and the eggs. That should be enough because you're only going to be gone 3 days.
Okay, that sounds good.
North of Seattle, Pat O'Neill is headed out for another lonely haul on the highway.
All right.
His life isn't all that different from most truckers, except for one thing. Pat O'Neill retired 3 years ago.
Well, I just turned 55 March 5th, 2003. I thought, well, I got 35 years. Yeah, I'll go.
O'Neill is typical of his generation. He spent his entire career working as an aircraft mechanic for one company, United Airlines.
I always felt I was doing quite well working for United. I had a work ethic, and I was very loyal to the company. When they called, I went to work.
Back in 2003, when United was trying to cut costs, O'Neill says the company encouraged him to retire.
They said, if you old guys want to get out and save your medical insurance for your retirement, it might be a good time to think about leaving.
O'Neill took the advice and retired, counting on a guaranteed $3,000 monthly pension check for the rest of his life.
I knew I had a good retirement. Check would come every month, and we'd be able to just kick back, enjoy life, no more working midnights. live like a normal human being, as we call it, and spend quality time with each other.
But after a while, Pat O'Neill got a jolt. His pension was slashed by a third.
It was money that I worked for, that I earned, that I felt that I did my job, and my thought is that retirement is sacred. They do not touch that. This is what you signed for. It's flat wrong for a company to have to go back on their word as far as your pension. I'm going to be forced to have to stay working because of what United Airlines in the bankruptcy laws, the way it was indicated, said they could do it and got away with it.
Pat O'Neill, like more than 1 million other workers and retirees, is a casualty of corporate restructuring and Chapter 11 bankruptcy. United Airlines filed for bankruptcy in December 2002. In the 90s, United had been flying high, but then low-cost carriers started eating away market share. And after 9/11, United lost traffic and money big time. Deep in debt, United sought a government loan guarantee. After being rejected, United filed for bankruptcy.
Everybody knows, I think, Chapter 11 serves a useful purpose. That's why the statute exists. It's there for companies to take advantage of when the occasion presents itself.
Glenn Tilton had been hired as United's new CEO just 3 months earlier. He came with experience in bankruptcy at Texaco.
The die was cast when Mr. Tilton was hired.
Why?
Because Mr. Tilton was brought in to do what the board and previous management.
So, as you can hear, another unfortunate situation of mismanagement occurring. You know, the company went bankrupt. So, of course, any benefits that the employees or retirees were receiving were interrupted. And like I said, that fell on the retiree. Imagine you're sitting back enjoying retirement. Next thing you know, your pension's cut into a third of what you were receiving. Now you have to go back to work, right? Most people aren't prepared for that. So I just wanted to share these examples with you all. It's definitely not to scare you, but just to shed light on some of the things that could potentially happen if a pension is mismanaged. And that's why sometimes people choose to do personal pensions or the lump sum option because they do not want to count on the employer or the state to manage that pension fund, because they know if something happens, they'll be impacted, right? Okay, so next, let's chat about the income gap. So I know there may be people here within different pension systems, but I just wanted to illustrate what I mean when I say income gap, because that phrase might be new to some of you. So let's say you're participating in the Pennsylvania state pension system and you've been there for 30 years and your final salary is $60,000. This is how the calculation works. So they take the 2% multiplier that they use, and then depending on the class that you fall, for this example, we're using the 1%. So there are some classes that have 1.5%, etc. And then you take the years of service. So in this case, 30 years and the final average salary. We're going to use $60,000. That would mean when you receive your pension, when you retire, you're going to be receiving $36,000 per year, or $3,000 for the month. So that would leave this person with a 40% income gap. Now, like I mentioned earlier, many people have different, in many cases, people have other accounts like their 403B, 401ks from maybe previous employers, IRAs, different accounts, Social Security, and those will kind of come together to help us fill that income gap. But if your pension is going to be your main salary that you're going to be receiving during retirement, then you want to make sure that you can fill that income gap. Or if your expenses are going to if 60% of your salary is going to be enough to cover your expenses during retirement, right? Because sometimes people go into retirement with very little bills, so they're okay with that. But it's just something to keep in mind. Now, let's go on to our next slide. We have the payout versus the lump sum. So, like I mentioned earlier, this is a very common question people ask when they meet with me. What's the difference in taking the lump sum versus just receiving the payout via the pension system? So, of course, you want to consider the pros and cons we discussed on the previous slide. So, if you take the payout, right, you want to keep in mind all of those pros and cons we went through. Now, if you wanted to explore the lump sum option, this would allow you to make your pension a personal pension. Now, with this option, you would do what's called a qualified rollover. So you would still get your payouts via your personal pension, but you would have more flexibility to increase and decrease your payout amounts, to create a legacy plan if that's important to you. You'll have more security because you'll be working with a company that's more experienced with managing pensions, and anything that would be inflexible with your pension plan, you can open that up with the personal pension plan. Okay, so I want to tell you a little more about a client of mine, Jim. He reached out to me to discuss whether he should take his pension via the UC system or maybe take the lump sum option, right? So the UC system, they were going to pay him $12,454, and this was with the no spousal survivorship option. So in his case, he wasn't as concerned about that. He was going into retirement divorced, so no spousal survivorship and nothing left to the kids. This is what they were going to pay him. Okay. Now, like I mentioned earlier, he wasn't worried about leaving his pension to his wife anyway, but if he did, he would have to reduce the payout amount to $11,326 and still nothing left to the kids. Okay. So in a different world, if they were still together, that's what he would, be looking at. And then, so his goal, so I was able to help him create a personal pension plan with the lump sum option. So in doing this, the personal pension would pay him a little bit more, so $13,500, right, a month. And he can leave his account balance split between his 3 kids whenever he passes away. And also, if he needs long-term care during retirement, the pension will pay him double for several years. So, for example, instead of him just receiving that $13,500, he would be receiving $27,000 a month to cover the cost of the long-term care needs. And if you remember earlier, I said with the UC system, you would forfeit health benefits if you take the lump sum. Now, since he had Medicare Parts A and B, I was able to find him a Medicare plan that was in network with his doctors and was actually cheaper than him just continuing with the school's medical plan. So it was actually pretty fun to be able to support him with this, and me to be able to use the other specialties that I do. Like I said, I know we're focusing on the retirement planning piece today, but Medicare plays a huge part in retirement planning, right? So we were able to get him in a really good situation that he was comfortable with. Okay, so we're getting towards the end here. So as you've been listening to this webinar, maybe some of you have questions about your own retirement plan, like, does my retirement plan match my goals and desires? Is there a better way to plan for retirement? These are common thoughts people have, and I want you to know how I may be able to assist you with some of your questions and concerns. It starts with a strategy call to get a better idea of what you need help with. So in doing so, I'll get to know you and understand what you need help with, and you'll receive a complimentary financial analysis, which will entail if you're on track to achieve your retirement goals, if your risk tolerance aligns with your investment strategy, how to maximize your Social Security income, and we'll even go over how Medicare plays into your retirement plan as well. So, like I said, it's a complimentary financial analysis, so your money stays with you. Now, let's say we complete a financial analysis and you want to move forward with a plan to improve your retirement strategy, then I'll be compensated by the company who will be managing your funds. So that just gives you kind of an idea of how things would go. Now you can scan this QR code that I have here and it'll take you to my booking calendar to schedule a call with me. I would love to help you have a stress-free retirement strategy. And then also here's my website, my email, and my phone number. So if you would like to contact me, feel free to reach out. Thank you for listening, and I'll go through the questions that you all had.